Welcome, wonderful students, to Lesson 28 of the Changing Economic World topic, and the second lesson of the UK economy topic. In this lesson, we will be further exploring this idea of a post-industrial economy, so you will understand better the areas of the UK's economy that are the most important, and the areas that most people work in. Please take a moment to write the date, title, and learning objective, and have a pen and paper ready to learn. Write 1 to 10. Answer the questions from memory so that we can find out how much you have learned from previous lessons. Go for it. Number 1. The UK has a post-industrial economy where services and the research sector have replaced manufacturing. 2. Before the Industrial Revolution, around 1800, the UK's largest sector was the primary sector. It's important here to remember that the Industrial Revolution didn't just happen in 1 year, it was spread out over about 70 years. From about 1760 to about 1840, 1830, but 1800 is a good middle point of it. 3. The decline of manufacturing in a country is called deindustrialisation. 4. The largest sector in the UK in 2019 was the tertiary sector. 5. The main region of Nigeria in which oil is extracted is called the Niger Delta. 6. The main religion in northern Nigeria is Islam. 7. Colonialism led to the exploitation of natural resources, slavery, and a lack of investment in infrastructure in many African countries. 8. A tariff is an example of a trade barrier. 9. The Human Development Index is made up of 3 measures. They are literacy rate, life expectancy, and GDP per capita. And 10. Approximately how many people died after the Chile earthquake in 2010? It's estimated that about 525 people were killed directly as a result of the earthquake. Please give yourselves a mark out of 12 because number 9 is worth 3. If you got 10 or above, excellent. Please write any that you got incorrect and write their answers and test yourselves on them repeatedly. Excellent. I'm going to introduce this lesson by drawing your attention to one of the most famous universities in the world and one of the most well-known and respected in the UK, a university called Oxford University. And based on this university, I'm going to show you some questions and I'd like you to answer them using the best of your knowledge and we will discuss the answers. So, the University of Oxford logo, and here are the questions. Try and answer them. Okay, so number 1, what sector would teachers at the University of Oxford be in? Well, teachers are in the tertiary sector because they're providing a service, an education. 2, what sector would COVID-19 vaccine researchers be in? These people also work at Oxford University, but they are in the Quaternary sector. Researchers inventing new things, new products, new ideas are in the Quaternary sector. 3. Why are there so many more university students now than in the past? Interesting one, and you could have said several things. First of all, you could have said the population of the UK has increased, so that means more students. You could have also said, secondly, that education has improved, meaning more people can go to university because they're more educated. You may have also said that the skills that you gain at university give you access to higher paid jobs, which attracts people to university. This is especially important since the UK's economy has changed to the tertiary and quaternary sector, which are exactly the sectors that universities train people in. 4. How has the improvement of computer technology affected the quaternary sector and why? Well, the arrival and the development of modern computers, for example in phones and in laptops and in PCs, and in virtually every job, has completely changed the quaternary sector for a few reasons. Firstly, it's become much easier to research and find things out because of the internet and computers. Secondly, computers are able to calculate things much faster than people can. Because of that, people are able to research new ideas and test new theories and, for example, experiments much more easily than they were in the past. Finally, computers have allowed people to share information much more easily because of the internet, which means that research is able to be shared and that thereby the quaternary sector is able to be advanced even more. People are able to invent new technologies faster because they can share information more easily. Okay, so the University of Oxford is an example of one of the key parts of the UK's economy today, the knowledge economy. That is, many jobs in the UK today are based on gaining as many skills and education as possible. The jobs today in the UK are not based on how strong you are or how much land you can work or how much coal you can dig up. It's about your knowledge. That's what makes up the UK's economy today, especially the Quaternary sector. In this lesson, I'm going to further explore this idea of a post-industrial economy, and we will come to answer two questions. First of all, what is a post-industrial economy? And secondly, what are the key features of the UK's post-industrial economy? The UK is not the only country in the world with a post-industrial economy, but it does have some unique features. Let's find out. So the first question, please write this as a subtitle. Very simply, a post-industrial economy is when manufacturing declines and is replaced by the tertiary sector. This means that most people are working in cities and have higher skills than they did in the past. It also means that the UK, or a country with a post-industrial economy, is exporting fewer goods, fewer manufactured products. A post-industrial economy's employment structure looks like the UK's, much like this, with a very large tertiary sector, a reasonably sized quaternary sector of about 8% of people, a smaller manufacturing sector, and a tiny primary sector. This structure is typical of a post-industrial economy. So what exactly does the UK's post-industrial economy look like? Well, let's go back to our employment structure. Here it is. I want you to understand specifically the kinds of things that people do within each sector in the UK. So let's start with the tertiary sector. Almost every job in the tertiary sector in the UK today is based on computers. ICT, Information Communication Technology. Computers underpin every job that we do. Teachers use laptops to create lessons on PowerPoints. Lawyers use computers to research cases and laws. They also use them to write arguments. Bankers send money using computers. Shopkeepers use computers to account for their books and how much they're selling. Also to run websites. Websites and the rise of the internet depends entirely on computers. And online shopping, for example, requires computers. Computers are pervasive in the UK's economy, which means they are spread everywhere. And much of the tertiary sector is based on them. There are more than 1.5 million jobs in the UK which depend directly on computers. By that I mean the job is spent entirely with a computer, like this here. If you were to go to the City of London, almost 90% of jobs use computers. Second feature of the UK's service sector. These are three very famous banks. And banks are part of something called the finance sector. So how does a bank work, and why are banks so important in the UK's economy? Well, in the past, a bank had a fairly limited role. You would put your money into it and it would save it, and then you could withdraw it whenever you wanted to. But there were strict rules on how banks could use your money. Here's how a bank works today. In the last 50 years in the UK and around the world, the rules have been removed and stripped away about how banks can use your money. You see, when you put your money into a bank account, the bank takes that money and invests it in projects around the world so that it can increase its profits. This is called investment banking. For example, a bank might invest in a company using the money that you've put in there. And when that company grows, the bank makes a profit from its investment. The bank may also loan people money, for example, for a mortgage when people buy a house, or loan people money for people who are starting a business. When the people pay back those loans, there's interest, which means extra money on top of the money they paid back. That is another way that banks make money. Banks operate within the finance sector, and the removal of rules that prevent banks from investing and loaning to people has allowed them to become enormously rich. Barclays, HSBC, NatWest are some of the biggest and richest companies in the UK, and they also employ a lot of people. In the centre of London there is a place called Canary Wharf, with lots of skyscrapers, and Barclays, HSBC and NatWest have offices in these skyscrapers. And the people there, called bankers, have very high incomes because of the profits they make for those companies. As a result, the finance sector makes about £140 billion every year for the UK's economy. This is equal to about 7% of all of the UK's GDP, gross domestic product, which means of all the buying and selling of products and goods and services in the whole of the UK every year, 7% comes from banks making profits. The research sector. This is the relatively new one, and it's a really important part of the UK's quaternary sector. Most of the quaternary sector happens in universities. Universities are called research institutions because they are the places where new ideas are discovered, new medicines are created, new problems are discovered, new solutions are discovered for different problems. Much of what I have taught you about development, about the changing economic world, much of those ideas were discovered in universities. For example, the role of industry, or how we can use aid to improve countries' development, or the impact of development on environment. Much of that research was done in universities. So an important part of the quaternary sector is the growth of universities, and this has happened for a couple of reasons. Firstly, as the manufacturing sector declined, the UK's government knew that it was important to invest in the tertiary and quaternary sector. As a result, the universities of the UK provide a significant amount of the UK's income through research. More than £3.5 billion of revenues every year are created by research and the selling of research in the UK. One important example that is relevant very recently is medical research. Oxford University and Cambridge University have some of the most expensive and highly trained medical researchers and facilities in the UK and in the world. And Oxford University in particular is working on a vaccine for the COVID-19 disease. It is one of the leaders in discoveries of vaccine to cure diseases. In Cambridge, private medical companies called pharmaceutical companies who research new medicines came up partly with the cure for the Ebola virus, which affected and continues to affect many countries in Western Africa. So the research sector, as part of the quaternary sector, makes up an important part of the UK's economy, and that is because the universities in the UK are very strong. Finally, manufacturing has actually grown in the last 20 years compared to in the late 1990s. The government has invested in factories and it's tried to attract manufacturing companies from around the world. It's done this by training people in engineering, giving them apprenticeships, and also reducing the business tax, which means that when a manufacturing company sets up a factory in the UK, it has to pay less tax, which means it's more profitable. Compared to the past, the UK's manufacturing sector is slightly different now. The largest type of product that the UK manufactures, and the most common and the one that makes the UK the most money, are cars. However, most of the cars that the UK manufactures now are not companies that are British. They are for foreign car companies. For example, the Nissan plant in Sunderland or the Ford plant in East London. These companies are examples of manufacturing, but for foreign companies. Most of the manufacturing that happens in the UK is high-tech. For example, weapons for the military. British Aerospace, BAE Systems, invents new fighter jets, new missiles, new space shuttles, and aircraft. It is the high-tech manufacturing sector that is dominant, which is an important part of the UK's manufacturing now. Additionally, the UK is important in manufacturing technology. For example, components for trains, such as the electrical wiring in trains, and computer chips for phones and computers. A really important computer chip manufacturing company called ARM is based in Cambridge. And so manufacturing in the UK has changed from low-tech things like textiles and steel making to manufacturing high-tech products like cars. This sector now requires more skills than it did in the past. All of these sectors generally require lots of skills. They require the population to be educated. And so there is a relationship between being educated and the growth of these sectors. Because the population of the UK is increasingly becoming educated, more people than ever are going to university, this allows these sectors to grow because there are more high-skilled employees to fill these jobs. Because there are more high-skilled employees in the UK, foreign companies that work in these sectors set up in the UK because they know there'll be employees who can work well in these sectors. As a result, these companies grow. Universities grow, banks grow, computer jobs grow, manufacturing grows. And because these sectors grow, more people at school are encouraged to get a higher education at university because they know that there will be high-paid jobs available to them. This is the picture of the UK's post-industrial economy today. To that question of deindustrialization. Many of the companies that dropped out of manufacturing in the UK didn't go bankrupt, but in fact they left the UK. For example, Dyson, a famous manufacturer of hoovers and of hair dryers, that company didn't go bankrupt. In fact, it's more profitable than ever. But what it did was it moved its factories to NEEs, like Malaysia, because they have lower labour costs. Labours are workers. If you have to pay workers less, you make more profits. And so much of the manufacturing that used to happen in the UK has moved abroad, but the company headquarters have remained in the UK. And that's important because the headquarters are often in the research sector. The new technologies that create Dyson Hoovers are actually researched in the UK. One of Dyson's biggest headquarters and research buildings is in Malmesbury in central England, which is where the new technologies are researched in the Quaternary sector, which is another reason why high-skilled, high-educated jobs have grown in the UK, because the headquarters and the research departments of companies have remained in the UK, whereas the manufacturing has often left to cheaper manufacturing locations, for example, China and Malaysia. This lesson has been the story of the UK's post-industrial economy. Let's assess your learning. Please write 1 to 10, answer the questions from memory, and then mark your answers. Go for it. Number 1. A post-industrial economy happens when manufacturing is replaced by the tertiary and quaternary sectors. 2. The second largest sector in the UK's economy by employment is the secondary sector. 3. UK's research sector produces about £3.5 billion in revenue every year. 4. The UK's main manufactured products are cars. 5. One important reason why the tertiary sector has grown so much in the UK is because of the invention and advancement of computers. 6. The finance sector has grown because banks are able to make more profit now than in the past. 7. Government policies in the UK in the 1970s and 80s reduced the rules preventing banks from investing. This has allowed them to increase their profits. Because remember, a company invests in order to make a bigger return than it put in, to make a profit. 8. Much of the quaternary sector in the UK happens in universities. 9. The finance sector generates about £140 billion of revenues annually, every year. And 10. Manufacturing declined partly because of lower labour costs in other countries. Please give yourselves a mark out of 10. If you got 8 or above, you really understood this. Time to really embed your learning and to make sure that you've understood this deeply. I'm going to show you some questions. Answer them using the knowledge you've gained and then mark your answers in green. Go for it. So number 1, the pattern of the UK's employment structure in 2019. Remember, whenever you're describing a pattern on a graph or a map, you need to say the overall pattern and specific numbers. For example, or the primary sector is the smallest, about 2%. Or you could have said 2. Suggest one possible reason for the size of the secondary sector in the UK's employment structure. Deindustrialisation, decline. Privatisation and globalisation, loss of manufacturing. Recent reinvestment in manufacturing, slight increase. Outline the key features of the UK's post-industrial economy. So that last slide that we discussed, the key features of the UK's economy. Strong research sector, universities, this much revenue, high-tech products manufacturing, most UK jobs depend on computers, knowledge-intensive economy, which means it's based on high-skilled jobs, finance sector, very important. Give yourselves a mark out of 8 and make sure that you add any corrections in green, or any parts that you missed of these, make sure that you add them in green as well, so that you know that you can produce the perfect answer. Thank you so much for joining me for this lesson. Final task, write down 2 questions based on anything you've learned this lesson and answer them from memory, and then test yourselves in a week. Well done. Next lesson, we are going to go to a very special place in Cambridge and another special place in Newcastle. They're called science parks and business parks, and I'm going to show you why they're so important for the UK and why they've grown, and how someday you may want to work there, and I'll show you why. Join me then. Thank you.